Come here, plant. You like the plant? I like the plant. What's good, everyone? It's me, MT, here today in my new apartment. And what better way to break in an apartment than with a book talk video? Oh, yeah. I'm thinking it's about time that I read another book, and that I did. And so I got to show for it. Original Gangster, the real life story of one of America's most notorious drug lords. It's a big title. I believe when I was reading it too that I saw something about the rise and fall of, and I think that's a very accurate description for the main character. It's a nonfiction, it's an autobiography about Frank Lucas, the same person who the story or the film American Gangster is based on, played by Denzel Washington. I said the rise and fall is a accurate subtitle for this book because you see this man come up from horrible circumstances. He's a black man from North Carolina, and a lot of the episodes and details of the narrative harken back to an event that occurs when he is 6 years old. And he sees his cousin get shot point blank by a Ku Klux Klan member for allegedly hitting on a white girl. And a lot of other traumas unfurl, such as the father getting in a scuffle with the sheriff and then having to run into the woods and seeing his mom support multiple brothers and sisters when she's barely making a cent herself. You kind of see why Frank is led to the decisions that he does make from a very early age. He runs away and survives the only way he can, and that's by stealing, by gambling, by beating people, and just taking their money. And you see him go through the stages of absolute poverty. And sometimes he's just sneaking his way on buses and living under people's porches. It's despicable. Not him, but the circumstances under which he has to live. And to me, those are the most interesting points of this book. The parts at which he goes through the horrors of poverty. You know, like I'm sitting here in my new apartment and, you know, I'm paying bills and yeah, it kind of sucks and yeah, I don't have a lot of money, but I've never been through that. And in many ways, even though it's not him making a commentary on poverty or racial dynamics in America, it is a unique perspective on one black man's experience with it at a very young age. And I am sure, I can say with certainty, that is not a story that is unique to him. Where it is unique is where you see him start to make his way through the ropes. Clearly, he is not fashioned to fit in this system of American racist capitalism. So he finds his way to Harlem, New York, quote unquote, from the book, where the black people are. That's where he wants to go because that's where he knows he can make it. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And that's why I'm staying right here. When he gets to Harlem, things aren't so different, but he makes his way through the cracks. Literally drug peddling, also committing the same acts of thievery and stealing, and just acting crazy with his money and, you know, weapons. I think at one point he robs a bunch of Italian mobsters at a casino, even for their clothes, and they're so pissed they put out hits on him. You see him go through these stages of psychotic decisions, and it's hard to rationalize. Like, I don't agree with a lot of it, but it's fascinating to read and to see and think this is someone's life. And he eventually makes his way to become the right-hand man of the King of Harlem himself, Bumpy Johnson. And that's where the story gets even more interesting, because that's where Frank starts to make his decisions to be a boss. You see that it governs his decision-making process, where he never wants to return back to the state of poverty that he was in initially. And he's offered jobs at many times, like to be safe and secure, but that's not enough for him because he wants to get far, far away from, where he came up. And I like reading it because although I don't think he rationalizes what he does, he paints it in a way where you see why he made the decisions he did. Chasing down heroin from other countries in order to become the crime boss that he became, and creating a whole drug trade and culture, blue magic, all of that, and literally becoming a king of Harlem and a drug trade. There are moments in this story, it's episodic, so you see a lot of episodes in his life. This is his first book, so it's not written in a way where it's like a well interwoven narrative, but you see a lot of episodes in this story that are difficult. They're difficult to stomach. If you're familiar with crime films or stories, then you're probably aware of like the kinds of acts that occur. Well, this book isn't empty of those. You do see a lot of it, but you see it through his mind, and you see what was going on. What his perception of it was. He is an interesting situation because in order to cope with the fact that he was peddling this vile, destructive substance in New York, he shuts off a part of his psyche that would register that emotionally. But that doesn't make him any less human, and you begin to see how it still surfaces in a lot of what he sees. Like, there's some really interesting scenes in this book that you would not expect to be interesting. I remember a scene on a farm where he's drinking beers with a cow, and it becomes his best friend, and then he ends up seeing cows getting served the next day, and I don't want to tell you much about the event, but there's a lot of episodes here that get you into it. It's a real easy read, and I like it because it's historical too. You know, Although this is a very biased autobiography, and I can tell, it does seem like he's hyping up his reputation a bit. I mean, guaranteed he's a boss, but some of these events, I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. What was I saying? It's still historical. Like, it's situated in New York, so you see a lot of the landmarks. You read about them, from the different boroughs to Queens to Manhattan to Harlem. I mean, not so much like Bronx or Brooklyn, but I like those aspects of it. And then seeing other historical events that maybe you wouldn't think about, like a Muhammad Ali fight. That's one of the most interesting scenes in the book. And I don't want to get into discrepancies between the film and the book, but you'll notice parts that make you question who is telling the truth, or if either really are, or if you have to kind of like reconfigure your own understanding of the truth. I mean, can you trust Hollywood? Can you trust him? Can you trust his ethos? I like seeing both accounts. It really puts things in perspective of how to perceive a narrative. But at the same time, he is very humble about his situation, who he was, and who he became. It's about the rise and fall of a drug dealer, and he does fall pretty hard. But that doesn't mean he's not still commemorated. And I think the most fascinating part of this book is when it comes to the end and he's standing there outside of the screening of his own story in American Gangster. I don't want to comment any more on that. I feel like I'd give too much away. I recommend reading this if you can stomach it, if you like this kind of mobster genre and you want to see a non-fictional spin on it. I think this is a very interesting perspective, especially from the perspective of race. Thinking about the situation of the black man in um, 19, 1900s America. With that, I was recommended a film based on my enjoyment of the book that was Hoodlum. I'm going to check that out, but for the meantime, I got to return the favor for you, and I'm going to recommend one of my favorite crime films, King of New York, Christopher Walken, Samuel L. Jackson. Um, I really like this one. I don't want to talk too much about it, but book reminded me of it, and yeah, I liked them both. But with that, I hope you enjoyed the book talk. I had a lot to say, and that's a trend I intend to keep. So, ladies and gentlemen, go read something good, and I will see you with more book talks to come. Tea out here in an apartment.